But I guess my point is that, like, when I was starting off as a journalist, as an essayist, the way to succeed was to offer original ideas and provocative, surprising opinions, to be counterintuitive, to say, like, oh, this is something that's going on in the culture. The conventional wisdom is this. What if we looked at it this other way? And if it pissed people off, all the better. That was the job. Like, it was not your job to just appeal to your existing audience. Your
Mm-hmm.
job was to, like, make people go to the party that weekend. Be like,
Yeah.
did you read that story in New York Magazine? Oh my gosh. And everybody was
Yeah.
talking about it. And that's what got you a next assignment. Like, that's what made editors call you again. And, 20 years later, we have the opposite. Like, I can tell you that if I pitched any number of the pieces that I wrote in my 20s and even in my 30s today, editors wouldn't run them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel so lucky to have started out when I did, because I certainly would not be the writer that I am, that I've been able to be, if all of these mechanisms had been in place, in terms of scolding and calling people out and just fear of saying the wrong thing, and being misinterpreted, that intent doesn't matter. But getting back to what we were talking about before, people are ravenous for this kind of old style
Mm-hmm.
conversation, just these kind of, they are really hungry for nuance. And I saw it again and again when I was on tour with this book. I mean, I would get beat up in the mainstream media, and then I would go do bookstore events, and they would be packed, and people were thanking me for writing the book,
Mm-hmm.
and liberal people, and it was like I had never seen such a divide between the media sensibility and the public sensibility. It used to be that the media was
Mm-hmm.
more sophisticated, that the media people in those spheres had more tolerance for dissent and sort of strangeness, and it's completely flipped now. It's remarkable to
Yeah.
see.
Well, the mainstream critic score has become a signal for which stand-up comedy specials to avoid. Like, if I see a special on Rotten Tomatoes that had a 40%, 30% critic score, but a 98% audience rating, I'm like, okay, this is actually funny. And then if I see the other way around, where the critic score is too high, I'm like, maybe I'll still watch it, but
Mm.
I'm thinking, there must be something about this special that isn't that funny, because they wouldn't, all the other
It
ones that
might
I've
be Hannah
watched.
Gadsby.
Exactly. I genuinely tried to watch her special,
Not that there's
and
anything wrong with Hannah Gadsby, but
yeah,
yeah,
it just wasn't
not
for
your
me.
thing.
I'm not the arbiter of what's funny. It just was not for me. I'm much
Well, it
more.
is what it is.
Yeah.
It's its own thing.
Yeah.
It has great value, but it doesn't. It does the emergence of that kind of performance. I welcome it. I think it's really interesting and
Hmm.
valuable. But the idea that this is now replacing the other stuff, that's just nonsensical. We
Hmm.
can have both. Yes, and, as they
Yeah.
say in improv.
Yeah. I like the cigarette answer for Hinge. I think that some of the most interesting conversations I've had at parties have been on the back porch smoking a cigarette, or
Yes.
the area of a bar, because I think part of it has to do with it's hard to use your phone and light a cigarette at the same time. And I I I, I never was one who would go out and buy cigarettes that often in college, so I was always bumming a cigarette. And so if someone gives you a cigarette, it's polite to stand there and start a conversation with a stranger, where you're just like, oh, hey, like,
Mm.
what brings you here? And sometimes that turns into a really cool conversation. So maybe we need more. Maybe we need to bring back cigarettes to become more social. But
That would be a
but
radical opinion. I guess vaping doesn't really have the same effect,
yeah, you can
does it?
you can you can ask someone for their vape, but I feel like the the perception of having a vape is much more, I don't know, like, it's, it's not as cool as smoking a cigarette. Like, it's not as artistic to pull out a vape and
Yeah.
just blow it, and the smoke, you could barely see it when it
Yeah,
comes
the
out.
visual of
Yeah,
it.
it's
Right,
much more
right.
sexy to light a cigarette and kind of smoke it outside. And I feel like it's
That's
much
right.
cooler, and it is a super social activity. Like if you smoke a cigarette, if you're out, you're gonna be in a group of people. You're gonna have conversations, and there are definitely times when I'm at a party and I'm in an apartment, and I'm guilty of this too, where it's just a bunch of people came to the same place to look at their phones, and that's basically the
Oh,
party. And so you can go outside and you find this guy that's outside on the back porch smoking a cigarette, and then you're out there for an hour, and then that ends up being like the highlight of your party.
see, now I'm nervous that like this conversation is going to get framed as Zach and Megan endorsed
Yeah.
smoking, and then we're gonna be canceled. But I mean, yeah, like I haven't smoked in decades. I'm too
Mhm.
old now. But like I also I have often said that it made me a better writer. So again, when I was in my 20s, I would be writing, and there was no internet, so you would get like stuck or something, and instead of going online, I would like light a cigarette and listen to some music and like look out the window and think. And usually the amount of time it took to smoke the cigarette was the amount of time it took to like figure out the next idea. And I could go back to the piece
Mhm.
of writing. And now I just look at Twitter whenever I can't think of something. And it's like constantly. I mean, it's many times, it could be more than once a minute. I mean, and it's really terrible. So yeah, it's too bad that smoking is so destructive to your health, because otherwise it has really nice qualities.
So, so does Twitter help you write, or you're saying it's a bad distraction? Like it's a bad
Oh, it's
distraction that's
terrible.
yeah.
No, it's terrible. Like I think I was in some ways a better writer when I smoked. Because I was just you could just concentrate. I mean, it is meditative. Like it
Mhm.
is a social thing, but it's also a very solitary thing.
Mhm.
It's just a sort of way of making you feel like you're in the moment, you're with yourself. Uh, I actually wrote a piece last year for Medium's Gen magazine, which I write for regularly, about staring into space. One of my students, I teach graduate students often, and one of them said, what did you do in your 20s? Like, I can't make sense of my life. Like, what was it like for you? Because I actually went to the same graduate program that I teach
Mhm.
at Columbia, and like I couldn't think how to answer her. And I thought, what did I do in my 20s? Like, what do I remember doing? And what I remember doing was like sitting at my desk and staring into space, or staring at the wall and just like thinking of things. Sometimes smoking and often not. It's
Yeah.
not all about that. But I do think that sort of those interstitial moments of blankness have been completely eliminated from life, because the minute you stop doing what you're doing, you're going to go look at social media, and like your brain is just going to fire off in a million directions, and you've lost the thread, you've lost the moment, and you've lost yourself. And it's a very, very different way to go about life.
Have you ever tried one of the social media blockers where it will just not let you get a notification for a certain period of time?
Yeah. So when I was writing my book, The Unspeakable, I was using that software program Freedom. I don't know if
Yeah,
people still
I
use it,
use it.
but
Yeah.
yeah, it would turn the internet off. Um, I didn't do it when I was writing The Problem with Everything, mostly because it was such a like there were so many facts, and like they were just it
Hmm.
was so culturally based. It wasn't personal, that I was constantly having to like look things up and check things and get information, and so it didn't really lend itself to that. But yeah,
So
it's a grim situation.